Long before becoming the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump had a significant past in the WWE. What a joy to meet you again on the Wrestling Paradise to tell you about the most mind-blowing stories about Donald Trump in pro wrestling. Do you want to find out how he reacted when Vince McMahon staged his own death on screen in 2007? Are you wondering which wrestler played his role on the screen just for one match? Are you ready to be astonished when you learn the impressive numbers behind the success of the Battle of the Billionaires at WrestleMania 23? Are you curious to know the reaction that the real estate mogul had when he was offered to get a Stone Cold Steve Austin stunner? And do you want to know what special stipulation he put into his contract when he participated in this storyline? You will have all the answers and so much more in our video. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the most mind-blowing stories about Donald Trump and pro wrestling. Here we go! Donald Trump has been connected to pro wrestling since the late 80s, a time when he even organized WrestleMania 2 years in a row in his Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, which was historical. As a big wrestling fan, he often attended shows as a simple spectator, and he also had the opportunity to be involved in major storylines on screen in 2007 and in 2009. And yet, a story about him reveals that, despite his knowledge about the business and his experience in it for years, the WWE is still able to make him fall for it and make him believe that the storyline is real, at least at the time when this story took place. Indeed, in 2007, a few months after the Battle of the Billionaires between Trump and McMahon, the latter staged his death in a television segment where he was seen getting into his limousine before it exploded. For a few days, the company did everything so that everyone thought that the boss had indeed died. And apparently, after seeing this scene on his television, the 45th President of the United States called WWE to ask if anything happened to Vince. Can you only imagine that the Federation staged this fictional event so well that even Donald Trump really believed it was real? This story, which was told by Triple H, is completely crazy and shows that when WWE does it right, wrestling can create a suspension of disbelief in anyone. Even if he came out the winner of the famous Battle of the Billionaires at WrestleMania in 2007 by having the opportunity to shave Vince McMahon's skull at the end of the match, Donald Trump will not escape the stunner of Stone Cold Steve Austin, the famous finisher of the Texas Rattlesnake, who was the referee of this battle, and who, as usual, enforced his own law in the ring by taunting everyone with no exceptions. Moreover, Steve Austin may remain forever the only man to stun a president of the United States. The little story behind this stunner is incredible. Basically, you should know that it was Vince McMahon who thought it might be a good idea for Stone Cold, the absolute fan favorite, to end this entire match by stunning the real estate tycoon, something that spectators always like to see. So Austin and McMahon went to tell about the idea to Trump, and at that moment, Donald's right-hand man, who was with him, immediately said that he shouldn't do it, that there were plenty of reasons why he should refuse. And it's true that we can easily imagine other celebrities would not have wanted to look weak by taking a bump, especially if they care a lot about their image. But then, Trump simply asked Vince if he thought this stunner could help the show and make it even better. Vince told him it would, and Trump accepted. This story confirms what the wrestler Bobby Lashley and Jim Ross, the best commentator of all time, said about Donald, saying he really was a team player when he came to WWE, and that he was humble. About him, Stone Cold will say precisely, "Donald Trump was man enough to go out there, and we botched it. He was cool enough to go out there and be a part of the show and make people happy. I dug it." So, it's true that the stunner was not the best of all time, but we can only acknowledge the fact that Trump agreed to take it. What made the feud between Donald Trump and Vince McMahon even more exciting at WrestleMania in 2007 was its incredible stake. The one whose representative would lose would have his skull shaved in front of the whole world. And when we know how much the two men care about their hair, we can think that getting their hair cut would be a tremendous humiliation for them. and it was a great suspense in this whole storyline to discover which one of the two billionaires was going to be bold. And let's not forget that Mr. McMahon never backed down from any stratagem, even the most vicious one, to achieve his goals. So we can really say that it was possible to doubt for the spectators. Can you only imagine if we saw Donald Trump having his famous hair cut? While for the fans there was this great suspense, backstage there was none at all, because the real estate mogul took all his precautions to be sure he would still have his hair at the end of the evening. Indeed, in the contract he signed with the WWE to participate in this whole story, he incorporated a stipulation which indicated that Vince McMahon would not be allowed to shave his skull under any circumstances, even if Donald's representative, in this case Bobby Lashley, would die in the middle of the match. So, including in the case of a catastrophe and an extreme situation that would have made Trump the loser technically, Vince would legally not have had the right to touch his rival's hair. After learning this, we can say that the Donald really cares a lot about his famous hairstyle. One element that we saw in all of Donald Trump's entrances when he was involved on screen with WWE was the beautiful divas who accompanied him every time. And after all, let's not forget that he was the co-owner of the Miss USA pageant for several years. And among the divas who escorted him in his entrances, there is in particular the beautiful Maria, the one who was one of the most popular female wrestlers in the late 2000s. And her story with Donald Trump is interesting. Indeed, you should know that the billionaire was the star of a television show, The Apprentice, which was a hit in the ratings. And the concept was as follows. Candidates competed to get an executive position in one of Trump's companies. After several years, a special edition of the show had been organized called The Celebrity Apprentice, and Maria was one of the celebrities who participated, as well as the former star of World Championship Wrestling, Goldberg. But her experience on this show ended badly, since she got fired by Donald because she would have had an inappropriate language according to him, what he would have called locker room talk. In this case, she was criticizing a candidate for being dirty, but for her, it was humor that had been misinterpreted. Years later, when she will be told about this case again, Maria will say that she thinks she was mainly fired because she was the least famous person on the show, and that the production had to favor the biggest stars for the ratings. This is only her vision, of course, but seeing her statements about him, we can say that she did not keep a very good memory of Donald Trump. At the beginning of 2007, while the storyline of the Battle of the Billionaires between Donald Trump and Vince McMahon was still beginning, WWE tried to take advantage of an event that had been talked about a lot in the media since the end of 2006. The clash between Trump and Rosie O'Donnell, a TV host. For your information, the origin of this clash concerned the revelations about the Miss USA, her drug and alcohol use, and her sexual activities, knowing that Donald was the co-owner of this contest. O'Donnell was critical of the fact that this woman could keep her crown despite all these revelations, but Trump said he wanted to give her a second chance. They are going to wage war on each other with statements in the media, and WWE jumped on that buzz in an incredible and rather daring way. The company is going to set up a match on Monday Night Raw between Donald Trump and Rosie O'Donnell. While the Federation had presented this match as a big event, it was actually two people in disguise, some kind of lookalikes, a confrontation that the one who was supposed to be Trump will win. And precisely, the funny thing is that the man who embodied the 45th president of the United States is a wrestler named Ace Steel, and he is the one who formed CM Punk at the time. Apparently, according to Steel, this incarnation of Trump allowed him to get a contract in the WWE. And it's still crazy to think that the company came out of the wrestling bubble and brought a media clash that caused a lot of talk in its own wing, even if it wasn't a fight between the two real characters, unfortunately. It's a bit as if, in more recent years, WWE had pretended to set up a fight between Will Smith and Chris Rock after the infamous incident of the slap at the Oscars in March 2022. So of course, it's something that may have seemed in bad taste and displeasing to some of the fans. But it's undeniable that it didn't leave anyone indifferent, and that it was a match that made people talk. When for a few days Donald Trump was the new owner of Monday Night Raw, he launched a new concept that will have an impact in the history of the Red brand, for better or for worse. Although it is important to emphasize that it was something fictional, since it was only on screen that Trump had bought Raw, in fiction and not for real. This concept is the one of guest hosts, namely personalities of all kinds who would be in charge of the show every week, whether actors, singers, or other celebrities. For one evening, they would be entrusted with the responsibility, on screen, of managing Raw. It was a real revolution at the time, since this concept was essentially going to last until June 2010, for almost a year, and that it stopped the idea of having a general manager on Raw for a while, namely an authority figure who was there every week, who decided the matches that took place, for example. And this is something that existed since 2002 on the Red brand. So on the one hand, this concept of guest hosts made it possible to bring celebrities and potentially make people who are not necessarily wrestling fans want to watch the show to see this guest host, which is therefore a relevant idea to try to attract viewers. But on the other hand, we could see over time that some guest hosts were not necessarily invested in their role, and that they were purely there to promote their own stuff. Whether we love or hate this time during which there were guest hosts on Raw, it is an innovation that will always be linked to Donald Trump. Finally, we're going to talk about the tremendous figures of WrestleMania 23's historical success, where Trump was one of the headliners, and get ready to be impressed. The show, which was promoted a lot with the Battle of the Billionaires, generated 1.2 million pay-per-view buys, which was the absolute WWE record at the time. And this is a number that was only beaten by WrestleMania 28 in 2012, and again with only 17,000 more buys. To be sufficiently aware of what this figure represents, it is almost as much as some of Brock Lesnar's and Conor McGregor's fights in the UFC, and boxer Floyd Mayweather, the latter being considered as the pay-per-view king. And we must also remember that the WrestleMania 23 pay-per-view in which Trump was costed about $50, which is still an investment just to watch a wrestling show. This event also made it possible to beat the attendance record at the Ford Field in Detroit, where this WrestleMania was organized, with no less than 80,103 spectators, which is more than the Super Bowl, which happened in the same stadium 2 years before. Although in football, you can't put people on the lawn, obviously. And finally, the ticket sales for this show brought in $5 million, which was unheard of in 2007. Seeing all these numbers, can you only imagine the impact of Donald Trump's presence in this edition of the Showcase of the Immortals? This is absolutely impressive, and it shows that, at the time, whether the fans were cheering him or booing him in the arenas, he left no one indifferent. He made people react, and really made the spectators want to buy pay-per-views or tickets, which is a quality that only the biggest names in pro wrestling possess. And just for that reason, Donald Trump made history in the sports entertainment industry. Wasn't that incredible? Can you think of another celebrity that has been involved as much in the WWE? Can you believe how crazy the Battle of the Billionaires was and how much money it drew? Through all of these stories, we were able to realize how rich his past in pro wrestling is. And it seems like Donald Trump means success in sports entertainment, since his numbers were never bad. His character was made for Vince McMahon's world. We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?